Hey everybody, Tim here for another Marvel MCU movie, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The third movie in Phase 3, came out in 2017, blew my mind. I really liked it. I'll just get that out of the way. I know a lot of people kind of had issues with it, and I mean, after Gunn, shortly after this movie, James Gunn had some issues with like Twitter and stuff like that. Still, I really enjoyed this movie. The background behind this movie is kind of interesting, where Marvel really wanted to use Ego as the character, but they couldn't because Fox owned the right. Where Fox wanted to use Negasonic Teenage Warhead for the Deadpool movie, but they couldn't because Marvel owned the rights, and they literally exchanged the character rights for this. So that's why we get Negasonic in Deadpool and we get Ego for this, which is kind of moot because shortly after this, Marvel was like, you know what, fuck it, we're just going to buy you anyway. But still, it was really interesting. A lot of people had issues with this because of how much it changed the comics, which I think is funny because if you look at all the Marvel movies, literally every single Marvel movie, which we've had 12, 13, 14, like 15 at this point, none of them have been like the comics. Let's be real here. They have gotten the spirit of the comics, but they are not an adaptation of the comics. And so I think they've done a really good job. And so people, for whatever reason, nitpicked this movie specifically because they're like, oh, Peter Quill's dad is actually like a character and he's the king of a planet. He's not what this movie made it be. And Ego, the planet, is an actual planet. He's not a celestial like this movie is. And they go down this list. Yes, all of that is true. But at the same time, look at all of the other movies. Like, none of them are accurate. So I thought this movie did a really good job of kind of adaptating the characters and bringing them to a new audience. I thought it did a really good job. So Kurt Russell plays the main character of Ego. I love Kurt Russell. I've been a big fan of Kurt Russell for like as long as I've been alive. And so what's funny is the opening scene for this, where it's like 1980. So just like Ant-Man started with a young Michael Douglas, and I was like, ooh, let's look at Michael Douglas. And I was so blown away. And then on rewatch, like X amount of years later, I'm like, okay, that's not that great. Kurt Russell still looks really good. And 1980, that would have been like Escapes from New York. Kurt Russell has the hair, looks really good. So the MCU is still really doing good with the like de-aging process. So loved that. Thought it was great. The whole opening scene with the Sovereign and baby Groot dancing, which they have made it very clear is not a new reincarnation of Groot from the first movie. It is the child of Groot from the first movie. Keep that in mind. We get lots of other little cameos. Howard the Duck shows up again. He was at the end credit scene of the first movie, and he's in this one a little bit more. Personally, I'm still, like, I don't care if it's a full movie. I don't care if it's a short or one shot, whatever. I need a Howard the Duck movie again. So we get that. We get more Yondu. Sylvester Stallone makes an appearance, who it's kind of funny because Yondu and Sylvester Stallone's character were both Guardians of the Galaxy, the originals, like in the comic books. So that's kind of interesting. We see Mantis. As I kind of already talked about, we find out that Ego is a Celestial. So we've seen Celestial before in the first Guardians movie, where like they go to a nowhere, where it's like the skull of a Celestial. Shortly after this movie, I'm a nerd. Like, it is what it is. I'm an English major. I love to write. I actually wrote a movie treatment script where I was like, oh, how can we do this? About like how after phase 3 is over, what would phase 4 be? And I like made up my own little script. It's embarrassing, but it is what it is. Where it's all about how Galactus who in my version is played by Bryan Cranston, is a Celestial also, and can sense the death of Ego because of this movie, and then comes to Earth to like figure out what the fuck just happened. I thought it was a really good script. I mean, granted, it's like sitting on a shelf somewhere, but that's what I do. So I liked the way they did the Celestial. I liked the way they handled Ego and Kurt Russell's dialogue, everything about it. Like, I thought it was really, really well done. Stan Lee's cameo is especially noteworthy because he plays a Watcher, which is just somebody who watches. Like, anybody who's read a Marvel comic, that's what they do. And so it was kind of interesting because it actually makes reference to his previous Marvel roles, and it kind of makes it seem like every role he's done has been the same character, just being him being a Watcher. So I actually really like that. Like, I'm totally down for it. My biggest complaint for this movie is, why the fuck does Ego admit that he puts the tumor in Quill's mom's head? And that's the moment where I'm like, oh. And so, I mean, there's multiple sides to it. Like, he's been alive for so many years. He's like, fuck it. Like, it doesn't matter if I admit that I did it, because it doesn't matter. But at the same time, I feel like he's been alive for so long, he would be smart enough to not admit to doing it. So it's just kind of a weird thing. The Mary Poppins scene is probably the most famous scene, with Yondo being like, I'm Mary Poppins, y'all. And it's great. It's fantastic. I'll admit, like, this movie made me fucking cry the first time I saw it. Where, like, especially he's, like, saves Peter Quill. And he's like, he may be your father, but he's not your daddy. Type thing, which could be taken the wrong way. But it is what it is. And then the funeral scene, especially with the Cat Stevens song, oh, it fucking broke me. Like, I was done for the day when, like, you hear Cat Stevens start singing and the fireworks and everything. It's heartbreaking. It is really, really well done. This movie is unique because it has 5 mid-credit scenes. Lots go down. We see things like David Hasselhoff shows up, which they make reference to multiple times, especially like Kit and Knight Rider, stuff like that. But at the same time, David Hasselhoff played Nick Fury in the S.H.I.E.L.D. movie. So this is like a return to the Marvel Universe. So we get that. We get an Adam Warlock reference, which technically we've seen before, but this is where they like explicitly say his name is Adam. So granted, this came out in 2017. Adam Warlock has already been confirmed to be one of the main characters for Guardians 3, because of COVID and everything's pushed back. So we'll see how that turns out. So we get a lot of stuff like that. We also see the first appearance of Jeff Goldblum in one of the scenes, kind of dancing, who doesn't show up until Thor Ragnarok. So that's like a little prequel, or a little shout out to what's coming later down the road. Lots of stuff. So I absolutely loved this movie. I thought it was really, really well done. Really liked it. It only takes place like 6 months after the first one. So even though it's years after the first one, like, they're pretty close together. So kind of messing with the timeline. Loved it. Thought it was really great. I'm curious what everybody else thinks about, like, Ego and Peter's heritage and all the characters and everything, so we can talk about it. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for subscribing. I'll see you guys next time for Spider-Man Homecoming.